They said the sun had never burned hotter over the Texas plains, but that day, it wasn't the heat that made men sweat. It was the girl standing on that wooden platform, wrists bound, dirt streaked across her cheeks, and eyes that dared the world to look away. The auctioneer's voice cracked like a whip. $1 for the prisoner. She can cook, she can clean, she can even shoot if you trust her with a gun. The crowd jeered. Boots scuffed, coins clinked. And then from the back of the crowd, a man in a torn hat and dust-covered coat lifted his hand. $3. The yard went silent. 3. The auctioneer blinked, half in disbelief, half in mockery. $3 for a half-starved woman who bit a ranch hand this morning. But the stranger didn't flinch. $3, he repeated, his voice low, tired but steady. The gavel slammed down. Sold to the fool with the scar and no sense. Laughter rippled through the crowd. As the woman was shoved off the platform, her bare feet stumbling in the dirt, she glared at the cowboy who had bought her freedom, or so it seemed. She spoke through cracked lips, her voice steady despite the pain. I'd rather die. The cowboy didn't answer. He simply took the rope that bound her wrists and cut it loose. The crowd went quiet again. He turned and started walking toward his horse. After a few steps, he looked back and said, "Then die free if that's what you want." The woman froze. She had expected a sneer, a shove, a claim of ownership. But not this. He untied his horse, mounted, and started to ride away. She stood there, rope hanging from her hands, unsure whether to follow or collapse. Finally, her voice, ragged but sharp, called out, "Why?" He didn't turn around. "Because I ain't like them." Dust followed his horse into the horizon. By nightfall, she found herself limping after him. Not because she trusted him, but because every direction away from him led to death faster. When she caught up, he was camped beside a dry riverbed, a small fire flickering under a sliver of moon. He looked up as she approached, but didn't reach for his gun. Instead, he tossed a tin cup toward her. "There's water," he said. "If you can stomach it." She didn't thank him. She drank slow, her hands shaking. "What's your name?" he asked. She stared into the fire. "Clara," he nodded once. "Luke." The silence that followed stretched long, broken only by the distant howl of a coyote. After a while, Clara said, "You didn't buy me to save me." "Nobody does that." Luke poked the fire with a stick. "Maybe not. Maybe I just didn't want them to keep you." She frowned. "That's the same thing." He looked up, eyes tired, shadowed by years of something she couldn't name. "No," he said quietly. "I've done worse things than those men. Only difference is, I remember everyone." He handed her a blanket, then leaned back against his saddle and closed his eyes. Clara didn't sleep. The next morning, they rode together. Not side by side, he led, she followed, always watching, always suspicious. The land stretched endlessly ahead, dust, cactus, and sky. The kind of country that didn't forgive mistakes. At midday, they stopped near a rocky ridge. Luke watered the horses while Clara picked at a piece of jerky he'd given her. She hadn't eaten in 2 days. "You from around here?" Luke asked. "New Mexico," she said softly. "Used to teach school." He raised an eyebrow. "Teacher, huh? What happened?" Clara's jaw tightened. "Stagecoach raid. Men with masks. They killed everyone else. I fought, bit one of them. That's why they sold me cheaper." Luke didn't speak for a moment. Then he muttered, $3, too much for any life." She looked at him. "Then why pay it?" He didn't answer. Just saddled up again. By sunset, clouds rolled in, thick and mean. The storm hit hard. Luke shouted for her to follow, leading both horses to a small cave cut into the hillside. They huddled inside, soaked and shivering, rain pounding the earth like gunfire. She sat close to the fire he built, arms wrapped around her knees. The wind howled through the rocks. "Why do you care what happens to me?" she asked suddenly. "You could have left me." Luke stared into the flames, his jaw working. "Because once I was the one tied up. Army found me half dead after a raid. A woman took me in, fed me, nursed me, never asked who I'd killed or what I'd done. She just said, 'You look like you need a second chance.'" Clara's eyes softened. "And what did you do with it?" He hesitated, then said, "Buried her 2 years later. Indians burned her farm while I was gone. Never forgave myself." The fire crackled between them, hot and orange and cruelly alive. Clara reached for his arm. "I'm sorry." He looked at her hand, scarred and shaking, then back into the fire. "Don't be. Sorry don't change nothing." Outside, thunder rolled like judgment. By morning, the rain had stopped, but smoke rose in the distance. "Riders, 3 of them," Luke cursed under his breath. "They followed us." Clara's stomach tightened. "Who?" "The men who sold you." He grabbed his rifle, checked the chamber. "They ain't gonna let go of $3 without a fight." She watched him, fear and something else twisting in her chest. "Run, Luke." He shook his head. "I ain't running again." Minutes later, the riders appeared dark against the rising sun. "Well, looky here," one of them called. "The fool who bought our property." Luke stood still, hands at his sides. "She ain't property," the leader grinned. "Everything's property if you can hold it long enough." The first gun went off. Luke dropped behind a rock, fired twice. Dust and smoke filled the air. Clara grabbed his pistol belt and reloaded with trembling hands. 2 horses went down. A man screamed, then silence. When the smoke cleared, 2 of the bounty men lay in the dirt. The third was gone, a trail of blood leading into the distance. Luke slumped against the rock, hand pressed to his shoulder. Blood seeped through his shirt. Clara dropped beside him, tearing at the fabric to see the wound. "You're hit," he winced. "Just a graze." She pressed her hand against it anyway. "You could have let them take me." "Could have," he said through gritted teeth. Didn't. For a long while neither spoke. The wind sighed through the canyon. When the sun dipped low, Clara helped him back to the horses. They rode slow, through fields of golden grass that glowed like fire under the fading light. That night, they stopped near a creek. Luke's arm throbbed, but he didn't complain. Clara washed the blood from his sleeve, her fingers gentle despite the roughness of her life. "You don't owe me anything," she said softly. He smiled faintly. "Maybe not, but I owe somebody something. She gave me mercy once. I figured I'd pass it along before I run out of chances." Clara looked at him, really looked, and for the first time since the auction, she didn't see a stranger. She saw a man trying to pay a debt the world had forgotten. Days later, they reached the edge of a small town. Smoke from chimneys curled into the sky, peaceful and grey. Luke pulled his horse to a stop. "You can stay here," he said. "Town's got folks who'll help." "Sheriff's decent. You'll be safe." She frowned. "And you?" He adjusted his hat. "I've got things to settle. People who don't like me breathing." "Then don't go," she whispered. "Stay." He looked at her, eyes soft but final. "I ain't meant for towns, Clara. Never was." She climbed down slowly, dust swirling around her boots. Before he turned to leave, she pulled something from her pocket, a single silver coin. "What's that for?" he asked. "You paid $3 to save me," she said, pressing the coin into his palm. "I'll pay one to remember you." He looked down at the coin, then at her. "You sure you want to remember me?" She smiled faintly, tears shining in her eyes. "You're the only thing worth remembering." He tipped his hat. "Take care, schoolteacher," and then he rode away, his figure shrinking against the burning sky until he was nothing but dust and memory. Clara stood there long after he was gone, the silver coin glinting in her hand. She didn't cry, not because she wasn't sad, but because for the first time since the world took everything from her, she felt something else. Freedom. Months passed. Word drifted through the saloons and post offices of the frontier. A lone cowboy had been found outside El Paso, a bullet in his chest and $3 silver in his pocket. Nobody knew his name, but Clara did. She opened a small schoolhouse in a town that barely had enough children to fill its benches. Each morning she placed a silver coin by the window where the sunlight touched it. Sometimes, when the wind blew right, she swore she could still hear his voice, low, steady, full of that quiet mercy that changed everything. "I'd rather die," she had said once, but because of him, she had lived, and that in the wild heart of the West was worth more than any man could pay.